about that before 11. First, though, when I say ADHD, you may think of children or teenagers who are hyperactive or maybe have difficulty concentrating, but there are also many adults living with the condition. Fiona Burton is a counsellor and psychotherapist from Burbage, and she was recently diagnosed with ADHD in her mid-50s. Well, she joins me now, along with Ian Hall, who works for ADHD Solutions as a specialist coach. Morning to you both.
Morning.
Good morning.
Fiona, what makes this just astonishing is that you work in this field. You work as a therapist and a counsellor. What made you go for go forward for being diagnosed with this?
Well, that's a really good question. And like you said, I work in the field. I have had a lot of experience of supporting families with children with special needs. So I thought I had a reasonable amount of knowledge about ADHD and would never, ever have thought of myself as having that condition. I didn't have problems when I was a young child at school. I always got a good report. I wasn't any problem in the classroom. But it wasn't until a therapist friend of mine started sharing, articles and resources about ADHD on her page, I thought there was a lot more to this, and a lot of it really resonated with me. And that really sent me on a journey of doing some self-assessments online. There are a lot of things like that on there, watching YouTube videos, and I realised actually I didn't have a lot of knowledge about it. The image of a child who can't sit still in the class, like you said, who can't stop talking, can't focus, is what the majority of people think of. And so that set me off on finding more about it. And then I actually had a private diagnosis only just in January, so it's been very recent.
And if you forgive me for asking, but what were the sort of key telltales that enabled that diagnosis to happen?
Well, it was almost like little light bulbs going on in my brain every time I read something. So things like getting organised and getting started on things, organising stuff like clutter in the house, alertness, keeping energy up enough to get things finished, having trouble staying on a task, and almost like having to wait till it's almost like right at the deadline to get things done. And the thing is, I had always had a bit of shame and anxiety around there must be something wrong with me, because I know I'm not lazy, I know I'm intelligent, but why do I find it hard to do things that other people seem to just kind of take in their stride most of the time? So there was a lot of other different aspects about it that made me realise my brain does maybe work differently from other people around me. So it was just a kind of waves of realisation, really.
I just wonder, I'll talk to Ian about this as well, but I just wonder, because of lots of people working from home, lots of students as well, online learning, that I know that the diagnosis can come through that when you realise that perhaps trying to learn online is really hard. Concentration levels are really, really difficult to maintain. I think lots of people are discovering perhaps that their children perhaps maybe need some help or maybe at least need to have a conversation about it.
Yes, and I think that's a really good point. Two really good points. One, that when people lose their structure, the real kind of framework of their day-to-day lives, I think it becomes a lot more apparent, because you don't have, got to be at school on time. You've got people telling you what to do and giving you work, and you've got that, peer pressure of, well, you finished yours, I need to finish mine. When all that's gone and you're just left to your own resources, I think that's when you can start to see the problem. So I think you're probably right, Ben, that there will be people who have noticed issues that they hadn't maybe noticed before. And also about just that feeling of not knowing what it is that causes that. Is it just because am I lazy? Am I not motivated enough? And that's what used to really perplex me, is because I know that I am very motivated, and it's more like the output doesn't sort of match the input, if you like. So I've been putting an awful lot of effort and time into things that maybe some other people could do in about a quarter of the time.
Fiona, thank you. Stay with us. Ian Hall also joins us here on BBC Radio Leicester. Ian, morning.
Morning.
I mean, I suppose the question I'd have to ask is, Fiona is clearly highly intelligent, successful, helps other people through psychotherapy and counselling and so on. And I suppose the question I've got to ask is does it matter? I mean, other than the fact that some of those elements she's talking about are obviously personally distressing to her, but ultimately, does it matter?
I suppose the reality is very few people understand what ADHD is. And the core feature of ADHD, and the one that everybody you speak to has, is the attention deficit side of ADHD. It's not just the hyperactivity bit. And when it's there, that does diminish over time. It becomes more restless, mentally restless as much as physically restless. But if we look at all of the things we were just talking about, organisation, planning, sticking with things, short-term memory, time management, these are executive functioning issues. And if you have ADHD, a lot of these are the most common things that people struggle with. And in all the conversations I have with adults, it's always, I can't get started, I can't get focused. In some areas, I feel that I'm being really successful, but there's something about me where the dreaded N-word, I'm not normal, why can't I do it? And it makes you question why you function so well in some areas, not others. ADHD says that your brain is built in a different way, and certain aspects of your character, your ability to think outside the box, your ability to be creative are huge, because connections lack in the brain that fire up all sorts of different thinking. But when you question your ability to function, to do basic day-to-day living things, and think, I'm 45, why can't I do it? It's because you're built in a different way, and understanding that it's not a choice to be built differently. It's not a choice to have been born with a condition that makes you different, but you do have better choices about how you deal with it if you accept it and understand it.
Well,
so I think that's the big part for me.
I mean,
understanding the acceptance. I
was going to say that if you're diagnosed later in life,
yeah,
what do you do with that then? I mean, by the time even by the time you're in your sort of 20s and so on, but particularly once you're through 40s, 50s, 60s, what do you do with that information?
Well, for an awful lot of people that have always functioned in a lot of ways really well, but there's always that thing of, why doesn't this quite work? An awful lot of people I speak to, a diagnosis it's an explanation. It enables them to understand themselves better. And one, it says, I've struggled with this because this is part of the condition I have. And that gives you a little bit of acceptance. It enables you a bit to be a bit kinder to yourself and perhaps think, well, I've done okay, but it just answers some questions. For other people, for some people, it is just an explanation, and in itself, it's fantastic. For other people, it's the way to wanting a diagnosis, and for others, it's looking at whether they might be medicated for ADHD, because it's a medication that's designed to forge missing connections. And actually, for a lot of people, it's like being on the right course of treatment that you've never been on, because it was never available, because nobody ever realised the reason was ADHD.
Is there? I don't know the answer to this. Is there a spectrum to ADHD from the perspective of, can you be a bit ADHD, or is it all or nothing? You've either got it or you haven't.
Well, like any criteria, there are a number of things that you have to fulfil, and so you have to be a number of things. I think the thing is, you meet the criteria, but it depends on the extent that it's there. The reality is, there are a very, very large number of people who would not meet the criteria as children. And the reason for that is that they are not the typical hyperactive. People that are inattentive and hyperactive are not missed. People that are purely inattentive, they're often doing okay, but they don't announce their presence. What we find is an awful lot of people get through possibly school, they get through all of that by masking it to some extent. They do okay, but they don't do as well as they could have done. As people get older and the pressures increase and there are more things going on, you are challenged on a daily basis in so many different ways. and you start to question why some things are not working. So it is true that an awful lot of people would simply miss as children because they didn't announce their presence in a way that affected others. The more that we mask things, it's definitely true of women more than men. We know that. We know that ADHD up to the age of 18, the ratio of boys to girls is 80% boys because boys present in a more hyperactive way. When we get to adult clinics, the number of females to males is almost sort of equal. What that says is, particularly with people that mask it, which is more females than males, those traits are just not seen until later. And then if you have all of those things going on, but you don't actually connect with the idea that it could be ADHD, and an awful lot of people never get that light bulb moment, which is really worrying, isn't it? If you can find something that explains you and it's ADHD as much as it could be dyslexia for some people or autism, that's a revelation, isn't it? If you look at it in that context, I think.
Ian, thank you. It's Ian Hall, who works for ADHD Solutions. We can give you the details on how to get in touch if you'd like to. Fiona, now that you've been diagnosed, how has it changed your view of the world? Has it changed you?
Well, just listening to Ian, and that's the overwhelming thing for me is it's the feeling I had when I got diagnosed was it was a relief. It was a massive relief, and it was like a big weight was off my shoulders. That feeling of, why am I finding things so hard? And the mask that Ian talks about is, that's something that is, so often talked about in counselling and psychotherapy, is that people having to wear a mask and hide themselves and hide how they deal with life and who they are as a person is so tiring, and it can cause a lot of shame and anxiety. So if you can understand yourself better, it leads to more self-compassion. And I think for myself, that's what it's given me, is to be kind of kinder to myself, understand more of my behaviours, and then therefore, like Ian says, you can then go forward and decide what you want to do. So in my case, I want to learn more about ADHD so that I can help other people, but also it just means I know of the different areas of my life that I need to maybe focus on to get better systems in place. So to overcome, the symptoms, medication is a possibility. It's not something I've looked into yet because it's very early days, but it's the learning, the knowledge, and the compassion really are the most key things for me.
Fiona, thank you so much for coming on. It's really helpful and enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There you are, Fiona Burton, counsellor.